start. We'll give it a minute for folks to join us before, so we don't lose any part of the recording for posterity. I think this is an important one that folks will be very interested in. Well, welcome everyone. We're excited to have you here today. I'm Commissioner Fretham. I'll be chairing this workshop on the Maplewood properties. For some background before we get started, the city of Maplewood and Ramsey County have been collaborating on a joint community engagement process, which started last fall. And the goal was to determine a range of possible options for future use of 2 county-owned properties in South Maplewood. We really have appreciated this opportunity to work together across jurisdictions and are grateful for the chance to hear from residents and interested members of the community on how those properties can serve the current and future needs of our residents and the region. So this has been a process. In this presentation, we are going to hear from the project consultants at Perkins & Will on those efforts to date, those community engagement efforts. We're really grateful to have them and want to thank them for working with us here at Ramsey County, the city of Maplewood, and all the other interested parties who care very deeply about the future of these properties. With that, there is a lot of information that Perkins & Will consultants are going to share. So I will be asking for all of our commissioners to hold questions till the end of the presentation. As John moves through the presentation, there's a lot of info. Some of your questions might be answered as we go. If there are brief clarifying questions on a particular slide, I'll monitor hand raises for that, but otherwise, as much as possible, please hold your questions. And John has let me know that we can go back to any slide during that question period. We want to make sure there's enough time for robust and thorough conversation after all the information's been shared. So with that, I will turn things over to Carrie Collins, our Community and Economic Development Director, to provide introductions and get things going.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and members of the board. Yes, so with us today is John Slack of Perkins & Will. To stay with the theme of, or a baseball analogy, we are rounding third on our engagement for Maplewood properties, and this will serve as a comprehensive overview of engagement to date. John is here and will walk you through what we learned and heard from the community, as well as give perspectives on a range of possibility for both of these sites. And unless there's any immediate questions, we do have quite a meaty PowerPoint before us. So John, I can turn it to you.
Great, thank you very much. First off, it's a pleasure to be here, and I want to thank you for your time to provide you with this update for this project. So here's the second agenda. What I'm really going to focus on as part of this presentation is just give you a quick overview of the project, focus in on the community engagement, which was a really critical component for this process and really drove the recommendations that we'll share at the end. Talk a little bit about site frameworks. Now I'll get into a little bit more detail about what those are, and then end on the recommendations. So a little bit about site overview. I'm sure you're all well aware of the 2 sites, but just as a high level summary, we talk about these sites in the context of this project as Site A and Site B. Site A is the northern county-owned parcel, 77 acres. So this is directly adjacent to Battle Creek Regional Park and just north of the correctional facility. And then Site B is the well-loved Ponds at Battle Creek golf course. So as with any planning process, early on, we really wanted to focus in on overall vision and goals for the project. And it was determined by the county and the city that we weren't going to get into really specific goals and vision and or design principles for these sites, but that will rely on sort of the overarching goals that the county and the city have. So obviously, you know your vision and goals well for the county. We also looked at the economic competitiveness and inclusion plan, and tried to pull out some of the key strategies to help inform this design process and some of the recommendations. And then we also took into account the ongoing 21st Century Parks Initiative, looking at equitable access and recreation in parks within the county. From the City of Maplewood standpoint, we really focused in on these guiding principles from the 2040 Comprehensive Plan. These guiding principles are really high-level community-wide values that focused in on resilience, equity, health, and age friendliness. And so these were also key drivers in our process. So outreach. So as was mentioned by the chair, this process started in early November and subsequently has brought us up to where we are today. Engagement was sort of the backbone or the framework of this process. It was really about going out and listening and documenting the diverse voices within the City of Maplewood and also within Ramsey County to really understand the needs and desires of the community stakeholders and community members for these sites. We focused our engagement around three sort of key activities, one being sort of community-wide meetings, the second being a series of online surveys, and then the third being stakeholder conversations, so focus groups. So as you can see on this sort of this timeline, there's the first community meeting, which was held in mid-November, and we had about 135 people attend that meeting. I would say all the community meetings, online community meetings were really well attended, which was great. It showed that people were really interested in the project. As part of these community meetings, we would do some presentations, we would have a public comment period, and then we would do some interactive sort of exercises around the different topics for the meetings. So immediately following the first community meeting, there was an online survey. The online survey essentially asked and posed questions that were very similar to the exercises that we performed during the community meeting. And we had almost 500 people respond to that. Community meeting 2 happened in late January. And that one was more focused in on conversations around common values. We were trying to phrase the conversation around what people thought was important and the potential as it relates to this site. We also started to talk and introduce the idea and conversation around land uses. So we had 130 people participate in that meeting, and then subsequently we had 335 people follow up with the online survey. And then the last meeting was held early March. This was a meeting that really focused in on presenting some different scenarios for the sites and then documenting the feedback that we got regarding the scenarios. There was about 110 people that responded or that attended that meeting. And then I didn't put a number in for the survey because there was only 15 people. I think at that point, maybe there was a little bit of attrition as it relates to the public engagement, but that third survey did not elicit much of a response. Throughout this sort of more formal public-facing series of community meetings, we also held a series of stakeholder conversations. I think all told, there was at least 10 stakeholder conversations. And the idea around the stakeholder conversations was really focused in on getting more of a countywide and or regional perspective. I will say that a lot of the individuals who attended the community meetings, at least the early ones, were probably more local. So within the 2 or 3 zip codes that directly surround the site. Whereas from a standpoint of stakeholder conversations, we really wanted to get a much broader perspective from the broader community about needs and desires. I think in the end, there was at least 10 of those meetings. And the way those meetings were set up was that we invited different stakeholders from different points of view, different organizations, different backgrounds and groups, so that they could be at a table hearing and learning from other stakeholders. And so I'll show you a list of some of those groups that attended those meetings. So just a quick sort of graphic summary of what we heard. So from the first community meeting and survey, these are sort of the key 5 outcomes that we heard. The first, and these are almost sort of in a descending order. So at the top, these are, I think, the comments that we heard the most, and at the bottom, these are probably the comments that we heard the least. So we heard a lot about protection of natural spaces. We heard a lot about the desire to maintain both of these properties as is, really for their natural resource value. At least in the first meeting, we heard a lot about golf. I think that there was still some questions about the decision to close the golf course and how was that made. And so that railroaded our first meeting a little bit, but we were able to sort of provide some responses and provided an avenue or a venue for people to ask specific questions about golf that didn't derail our entire process. Third was about public recreation. I think these sites are seen by the community as just real great assets. We heard a lot of people who talk about going out and walking the sites, who ski on the sites, even though they're technically private property, and just the wealth of natural resources, especially from the standpoint of animals that exist on the sites. And then to a little bit lesser extent in this first meeting, we started to hear about community supported land uses. So some conversations around housing, the opportunity for supportive land uses, like retail, and then community gathering spaces. And then last but not least, we started to hear a lot about food. So food production, community gardens, the need for resources to buy food, so a market or a grocery store, and then food access and food safety. From the second meeting, we sort of transitioned away from visioning and started to focus more on values and potential land uses. And so this is really a summary of what we heard from that meeting. So we heard feedback regarding open spaces and the desire from a lot of, I would say, that local voice, that local perspective to maintain these sites as open space in natural areas. From the standpoint of commercial development, I think primarily what we heard from the public meeting in the survey was that, maybe lean towards a little bit less commercial development. So people didn't want to see big box retail, didn't want to see industrial or some of those, those more heavy, dense site uses. From public institution, we did, at least from the community standpoint, hear about the opportunities. So for maybe some public uses like library, community center, and then for housing, there was definitely a preference for housing for lower density across both sites. And that's primarily what we heard from that community meeting survey. Now, because we felt after the first community meeting that there was such a strong voice coming from sort of the local perspective, we really wanted to focus in on these stakeholder meetings, these much broader countywide perspective and voices. And so here's a list of all the groups that we met with. Some of these groups we met with multiple times, like the Hmong 18 Council, the American Indie Family Center, and the Tawahi Foundation. But these are all different perspectives that we brought to the table. Most cases, these meetings had multiple members from different organizations at a table, so they were able to hear other perspectives. And a lot of these meetings were about trying to build consensus. We asked very similar questions that we did to the public meetings, but more focused them in on sort of community-wide values and goals. Some of the key things that we heard from these groups included neighborhood scale and character. So a lot of conversations about the scale of what these developments should or could be and what type of character was desired. We heard a lot about just providing the need to provide a lot of different housing types, whether this was single family or multifamily or even sort of assisted living. We heard a lot about affordable housing, the need for affordable housing, and specifically the need to provide a path to ownership as part of housing options and opportunities on these sites. Food access and community supported agriculture came up in almost every one of those conversations, which was really interesting, coming from such a diverse group of organizations and people. But that was a really important topic that we heard. Improved public transit, multimodal access. The golf course is not currently served by transit. The site A does have transit that comes up and terminates or has a stop at the corrections facility. So the idea to continue to have conversations with our regional partners about expanded transit to support these sites is important. We heard a lot about equitable development. I think the term equitable development crosses many boundaries and encompasses many things. It's about housing types. It's about creating jobs. It's about access. We heard about community space. There was multiple organizations, including the Hmong 18 Council, the Tawahi Foundation or Tawahi Group, that talked about the need for space for their organization, places to meet, places to hold events, spaces like that. We heard about improved community services. What are the opportunities to expand either city or countywide services in this area? Next is a really interesting one that we heard a lot of, especially at the end of some of these conversations, was making sure that these diverse communities within the county and more broadly have equal access, not only to development, but also the amenities. So a lot of these organizations talked about how can we be part of the development? How can we be developers on this project? How can we partner with the county on developing these sites, which I thought was a really interesting perspective. And then last but not least was, we did hear a lot about the importance of these sites as it relates to the ecology. And so there was a request to do some ecological assessments of these properties, which I do believe has been done by the county at this point. So as part of this planning process, and I'm only giving you a snapshot, but we did a lot of sort of due diligence, a lot of background analysis. We talked a lot about demographics, and so we talked about employment. So these sites are in fairly close proximity to some pretty good employment centers. One being 3M, but then there's some commercial areas directly adjacent to the east that do have quite a few jobs. We talked about the racial and diversity and ethnic makeup of this area. We really focused in on 2 mile sort of catchment area. And so you can see that about 35% of the population is non-white. So that is a pretty significant cross-section of, I think, the county. And so how do we plan and ensure that these projects best serve sort of the wide range of diversity that we do have in close proximity to the site, these two sites? And then we looked at the market. This was a high-level summary of some of the marketability of these sites. So obviously close to a regional transportation system and local transportation network, close to public parks, open spaces, regional amenities, close to other commercial areas and schools, and in real close proximity to downtown St. Paul. We also spent a lot of time sort of analyzing the existing site conditions. This really came out of a request out of our first meeting as a better way to understand the developable parcels or areas on each of these sites. So what these two maps are showing, site A, obviously the north site B is the golf course, is wetland classifications and setbacks. So you can see the solid color is the water body and the dashed line is the setback. So what you're starting to see here is that, purely from a setback from a water body standpoint, there are some limitations. If you look at soils from soil suitability, the red is least suitable for development. So these are soils that potentially are a little bit more challenging to build on. So we took that into consideration. Steep slopes, so the steepest slopes are in the red, obviously again, provides some challenges to how you can develop a site. And then sort of an ecological assessment that came from the state, just some of the richness of diversity and natural resources on these sites. So that led to really the creation of a composite, a very simple graphic, but it shows basically the areas in the white where development is easiest to accomplish. Once you get into the areas of the yellow and blue, it's just a little bit more challenging. And so we use this as a way to really drive sort of our ideation of different ideas for these sites. So I would say it was about halfway through this planning process when we came to the realization with the staff at the county and the staff at the city that it may be challenging to come to consensus on one idea for either site. So our approach was to take a little bit different angle and think about what we called site frameworks. And so our approach was to present back to the community and to the city and the county these specific frameworks. There are 6 of these frameworks, and our thought is that any development that happens on either of these sites in the future should include these as sort of givens. So in any sort of arrangement or agreement that you come to with a developer or a development partner, we think that these are important things that should be part of any development that happens. And this could be site-wide, or it could be, individual parcels if parcels are broken out for some specific use. So the first one was just provide some accessible open space to each of these sites. They're well loved, they're well used now, and to be able to maintain that, especially providing public access, we think is important. Provide community space for gardening and urban agriculture. I think we heard that in every single meeting that we held with the community. And so what that looks like, I think it could vary. It could be a large sort of regional community destination for urban ag, or it could be smaller areas for residents within individual neighborhoods. Preservation, I think, of the most sensitive ecological areas on these sites. Our previous analysis graphics kind of identified where some of those areas are. And there is a richness of ecology on these sites. And so the opportunity to preserve some of these things, I think, is important. Enhanced stormwater management. I think that both of these sites are primarily or mainly Site B, but Site A to some extent. They are part of a larger regional stormwater system. And so, expanding that and including that as part of a development framework, we think is important. Improved access and connectivity to transit. We think that that's important, especially to serve the needs of future residents on these sites and potentially future jobs. And then just being sensitive to adjacent land uses, especially Site B, the golf course. There are some single family homes in close proximity to the site, and we just want to be sensitive to what types of land uses occur adjacent to some of those uses. So when we presented these site frameworks as part of our second meeting, I think that they were pretty well received. I think that these bullet points hit sort of feedback that we heard from every group, but specifically didn't focus in on some of the hot button issues like maintaining a golf course or affordable housing or things. And so this seemed to be, people seem to like this approach. As part of this process, we also teamed with the Institute on the Environment from the University of Minnesota. They brought a really unique perspective to this project. And what they did was they actually created an evaluation tool. It's a pretty complex spreadsheet that kind of focused in on I think there are 8 kind of key indicator areas. So housing, recreation, transportation, cultural services, government revenue, economic well-being, environment, and equity and access. And what they did was, based on scenarios that we developed, they threw each scenario into this spreadsheet, and then it produced some outcomes. This presentation doesn't have in-depth summary of that, but when you see the final document, you'll see sort of the thinking that went behind that information, some more detail. They built this based on some goals that they thought were important. The first was to reveal all the ways that these two properties and or the land provides value to the community, and not just from a monetary value. What are the outdoor recreation values, the aesthetic values, the being in nature value. And then they also wanted to create more of a value-driven process to thinking about redevelopment. We thought that this was a good way to sort of balance maybe a purely a development perspective with the value that it would bring to a community. So this is really a high-level graphic summary of what their spreadsheet looked at, but again, focused on economy, society, and environment, and then broken down into these subcategories that got into a lot of detail about housing. So, different types of housing, low-income, affordable housing. And so those are all built into their spreadsheet. So when we first developed design scenarios, what we wanted to do was just represent what we thought was a range of ideas, because this was at the point where we realized that we may not be able to get consensus on one preferred alternative. So we presented a range of ideas. So for Site A, the first idea was maybe it's a no build, maybe it is maintained as a conservation area. Second is starting to increase in density and development. So second is cluster. So starting with small single family clustered housing, and then you start to bring in all the framework elements. So preserve open space, add public trails, and include community gardens. Neighborhood enclave is the next iteration, a little bit more dense. So starting to bring in, again, more different and ranging sizes of single family, but then also a little bit scale from the standpoint of twin homes and townhomes. And then again, the framework elements, open space, public trails, and community ag. And then the last one is probably the most dense. So it's just bringing in more residential housing types to support different income levels and different people at different stages in their life. And then potentially even a little bit of commercial, and then the core framework elements. So I'm not going to describe each concept. I basically did on the last slide, but you can see A1 is basically no build. A2 is really low density, a smaller lot single family with a large community garden element. That's the brown striped area on the left-hand side. A3 starts to get a little bit more dense, bringing in twin homes, townhomes, and then maybe there's a smaller community garden area, and then you can see there's trails and preservation of open space. And then A4 is the most dense, so starting to bring in more twin home, townhomes, and multi-family buildings, and then the opportunity potentially for some commercial at the eastern edge of the site. The graphic on the right represents a graphic representation of this this checklist or scorecard. We've called it multiple things that the Center for the Environment developed. And what you can see as you go along the top, the goals are on the left-hand side. Specific objectives that to meet those goals is in the middle, and then each of the concepts is labeled on the right-hand side. And solid white means that it doesn't meet or doesn't fulfill any part of that goal. And once you start to get into a solid black, that means that it does that really well. So things like housing, A1 doesn't do anything, right? Because it's not developed. A2, A3, A4 start to get into more density. And you can see, especially when you get into A4, the multifamily and the low income housing are solid. So that means it does a really good job of meeting those needs. So for site B, here are the initial design scenarios. Option A, or scenario A, remain as a golf course. B, we called urban reserve. So maintaining clubhouse and golf range. So maintaining some of that recreational amenity around golf, and then starting to bring in some single family residential. And then you have your key framework elements. 3 was village. So starting to densify the site a little bit more. And then 4 is probably the most dense option that provides the most mix of land uses and a variety of different residential on any of the 2 sites. This is also a site that we can see the opportunity for a grocery store and or some sort of community center element, as well as job creation on the site. So this is what the 4 concepts look like. And you can see as you move from left to right, you're maintaining the golf course all the way to a pretty dense concept on the right-hand side. And if you can remember back to the analysis, a lot of the area on the south end was not really developable just because of the wetlands, the setbacks, and a lot of the existing environmental conditions. So you can see in all these concepts, we really kind of worked towards that development analysis and maintained a lot of that site area, especially in the south, for recreational opportunities and maybe even urban ag, as you can see in concepts B3 and B4. And then again, for the checklist, you can sort of see how each of these concepts does as it relates to some of the key indicators and objectives as it relates to the overall goals. All right, 3 more slides. So as we started to wrap up, and when we were meeting with the leadership from the city and the county, they posed a question to me. It's like, John, do you have a recommendation? And that was a pretty challenging question, because I think throughout this process, we had heard such varying opinions as it relates to the future of these sites. But I do feel that based on what we heard, based on the goals and the visions that the county and the city put forward, I do feel comfortable making some recommendations, not specific to a concept, but recommendations as it relates to potential land uses on each of these sites. So for site A, these are pretty straightforward, pretty high level. But the first is, any future development for site A really needs to align to the county's overall goals related economic inclusion and racial equity. I'd also add to that the city's design principles from the 2040 comprehensive plan should be a part of that. And then the second one, any future development proposal for site A should include all the redevelopment framework elements identified in this document. I think that that's something that clearly we heard from the second meeting on that those framework elements were important. So I think the key recommendation, and likely the recommendation that I put my neck out there for, is that I do think that Site A should be redeveloped. I don't think that necessarily it's in the best interest of the city and county to maintain that as an undeveloped land. So I think it should be redeveloped as a mix of residential land uses, similar, but not exactly to A4, just because we know that likely these sites, depending on who your development partners are, they likely won't develop in any way close to how we've drawn the concepts. But we do think that that site would be really valuable as a mix of residential. So that would include housing types that range from single family to multifamily. Smaller single family lots we think is important because they will help prioritize and ensure smaller compact development, but then also increase affordability. We also think that townhomes, twin homes, apartments should be included to provide a wide variety of housing options that are affordable and market rate. And then we do think that there is an opportunity for some kind of community focused commercial space along Century Avenue. There is a great frontage to do a lot of commercial, but we do think that there is an opportunity there for a coffee shop or something that could support the local residents, as well as capturing some users who drive by. For Site B, first two bullets are similar to the first two bullets for Site A. Again, the meeting the city and county's goals related to economic inclusion and racial equity, and then also including all the framework elements for any future redevelopment on Site B. Site B, I think, is a little bit more challenging, because we did hear such an outpouring as it relates to the golf course use. So providing two thoughts here. The first is that Site B could be maintained as a private golf course. So we see potentially the county prioritizing the sale of this property to a private entity that will operate the site as a golf course. But that we do think that in any final agreement or any understand MOU or any agreement that happens with the developer, that adding additional public access to the course, primarily during non-peak hours, so maybe before golf starts or after 5 o'clock, that the opportunity to add some public access via trails and then naturalizing the site and keeping the site as a natural amenity would be really good, as if that's an option that you wanted to proceed with. The second option is to actually redevelop the site. I do think that this site would actually do well as a larger, more mixed-use site. And so mix of residential and commercial land uses, similar to B4, but again, not exactly as presented in the scenario before. So housing types, again, I think that there's a great opportunity to provide a wide range of housing types and styles. So single family, multifamily, single family, again, could be smaller, compact lots to increase affordability. And then a mix of townhomes, twin homes, apartments, condos, to provide a wide variety of housing options. We also think that commercial space should be included just because of its proximity to Central Avenue. It's a much more visible site. There's a lot more street frontage, which I think will allow commercial to do well there. But the commercial development could include a wide range of things, retail. We think that the site could support a grocery store. We do think that there's also an opportunity for maybe some office space on the site. And going back to some of the comments that we heard, especially from some of the diverse user groups as part of our stakeholder conversations, I do think that some sort of public use, whether it's a library or a community center or a space where different groups can get together to meet and celebrate their cultures, would be a good thing to add to a site like that. Now, I think with that, this is, I think, Martha's slide or Carrie's slide.
Thanks, Ron. So I think maybe we'll take a moment to kind of pause and react. However, in terms of next steps, the presentation today is predominantly explanatory and informational, and to get your reaction to it before we determine the range of options in terms of next steps. I know Property Management Director Jean Kruger is on the line and also has some additional information in terms of the ecological assessment. And so she might want to speak to that. And then we can open it up for questions and conversation.
Thanks, Carrie. Commissioners, good morning. Because we heard so much throughout the various engagement sessions around the ecological assessment of the site, we began looking for good partners to work with to conduct an assessment, earlier this year. And we have brought a firm under contract, Midwest Natural Resources. They will be doing their assessments of the site beginning later this month, and they will do a couple different visits to the site to make sure that they are seeing the seasonality differences from the early season plants to the various timeframes where migrating birds and or natural birds, to later in the summer season with the fall plants, as well as the key times to be looking for things like the pollinators. So they will do numerous visits throughout the next few months, with their report being provided currently targeted in the September timeframe. So that's the piece of assessment work that is still going on. I think we've reported before things like the standard survey work, the environmental assessments have been completed. And so we feel this is one more area where we'll complete the investigation over the next few months so that we can factor that into decisions going forward.
Madam Chair, Commissioners, I'll just add that John will be giving a comparable presentation to the Maplewood City Council on June 14th, I believe. And so they will be able to react and respond like you to the information, and then that will help to compile a final report. So I will pause there, Madam Chair, for questions.
Thank you so much, John, Carrie, Jean. I'm letting everyone put their hands up. There was a lot of information there. I'll start by asking Commissioner Reinhardt.
There we go. Well, first of all, I really want to thank everyone involved in this, and especially Ramsey County staff and the county board itself for really doing this process thoroughly in collaboration with the city of Maplewood. Looking forward to the presentation to the Maplewood City Council in June. I think that that's really important, that we get the clarity of what the city will allow or support. And I just, Perkins and Will, you did not disappoint. I mean, you have done fantastic work for us. Lexington Larpenteur and Rice and Larpenteur, I mean, but in other areas as well. You took this very seriously and paid attention to what people were saying and worked through it. And I was very impressed with that. So I appreciate the information today. And I'm looking forward to what the next steps are, because we needed to, this update was incredibly important. So I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, so thank you, Commissioner Reinhardt. Commissioner McDonough has requested to stop the screen share so we can all see one another, and that would be great. We can always put it back up if someone has a question about a specific slide.
Yes.
Next, Commissioner McGuire has her hand raised.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm going to add my gratitude to Perkins and Will for their great assessment and evaluation and presentation. I think you were really creative in how you were evaluating this, and I appreciate all of your assessments and the way that you thought about it. I just have a question, because it comes up in many of our community surveys. So if you could just comment a little more on how you handle the fact that when we put out surveys, either online or in open meetings, that we know that there's certain groups of people that are more able to be engaged. You know, these are the affected groups that have the time and the inclination and the ability to actually participate. And then there's groups that aren't as able to. And so sometimes we really want to have, you know, we really want that those groups to be represented when we're working on these projects. And you did talk about having certain focus groups of different communities, and maybe that's what you did. But I was struck by the fact that, you know, of the 2 online surveys, there was roughly a similar response rate. And so I'm wondering if those were were they the same people that were just commenting twice? And just because I want to get a true assessment of where the community is really at on this. And so if you could just comment on those things that we think about when we're getting community input.
You know, that's a really great question. And that's what makes public engagement so challenging. Obviously, public engagement pre-COVID was different because face-to-face interactions, there's a lot of benefit there. And post-COVID, we just had to do things differently. I am happy with you know, the turnout that we got, especially with the community meetings and the survey. But I do think that we realized early on that a lot of the people that were coming out were really well coordinated and organized. And they were coming out and they were speaking to those things that were nearest and dearest to their hearts. That being, you know, maintaining the golf course, maintaining these areas as natural resources. And so it became really apparent that that we needed to bring in those unique perspectives. And I definitely will give a lot of the credit to the county staff, because we had every intention of, you know, reaching out and talking to the diverse user groups that needed to be a part of this conversation. But it was challenging, especially in the time of COVID. And so Martha did a great job of really sort of starting internally within the county and finding out who the resources were, who the contacts were with these groups. And then subsequently, we spent a lot of time just having those one-on-one conversations. And how you balance that is a little bit more challenging, because it becomes a little bit more subjective. We did realize that we were hearing a lot of the same voices, especially once we started to document where, what zip codes the people were coming from. And so it became apparent that we were going to have to balance this, you know, more holistically and think about how we do that. And so we really kind of strategized about what that looked like, and wanted to, you know, make sure that the outside voices that we were starting to hear, I would say maybe more midway through the process, carried the same amount of weight as the organized groups that were coming out early and sort of really putting their voice out. And so that's what we did. And, you know, there isn't a science to it, but once we really started to talk to, I think, the more diverse groups, we heard a lot of common themes. You know, the themes around affordable housing, the themes about access to jobs, the themes about community gardening was mentioned by almost every group, which is great. And then we also heard the things that we were hearing from the other groups. Yeah, natural open space, that's really important. Public access to these spaces is really important, but maybe not as important as these other things, you know, that maybe have more of a direct effect and impact on how we live every day. And so that's the approach we took. If we were to purely, by a numbers standpoint, make a recommendation today, it would probably be keep the golf course and don't develop Site A, because overwhelmingly that's what we heard. But that's not what we heard. You know, we heard a diverse set of voices that said we need certain things on these sites that can benefit the broader community. And so that's really was our approach, and that's ultimately how we came to the point today. And as I mentioned, you know, staff said, John, what are your recommendations? Like, do you feel like you could make recommendations? And I said, yeah, like, I feel like we've documented what we've heard, and I feel comfortable in sort of professionally saying that these are the things that we think are the highest and best use for these sites that will benefit not only Maplewood, but benefit the county as a whole. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, and thank you so much for that, John. I really appreciate that response. It absolutely obviously mirrors your presentation, your report, that is what you were looking for, and I appreciate your further expansion on how that worked. And I just want to be on record saying that I am as we all are, huge advocates of civic engagement and the fact that people are mobilized and work hard to get their views across. I support that, but it does mean that we need to encourage all communities to do that, and we need to really make sure that all communities have that ability to do that. So I don't ever want to say that I don't appreciate people's ability to organize and come together and express their views. I really appreciate that, and we just need to make sure that all communities are empowered to do that. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I'll also quickly add that the conversations with the stakeholder groups were more holistic in a sense, because they started about conversations about these two sites, but they broadened to what the county could be doing more holistically and what the county should consider as part of any future redevelopment sites. And I think a lot of that feedback and information that we gathered will definitely be a benefit to Martha and Carrie on future projects as they think about what the community wants to see on these sites that have redevelopment opportunities.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner McGuire and John. Next, we have Commissioner Mattis Castillo.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, John. I think you have done great work, as Commissioner Reinhardt said, to really listen to community and kind of sort through some of the noise to get to the meat and to a recommendation. At your previous comments answering Commissioner McGuire's question made me wonder, if we get to those community stakeholders group that you said were more holistic, what recommendation on Site B did they make? Because you gave us two options on Site B, and I'm a little surprised actually that it's to leave it as a golf course. If we're listening to those community stakeholders that were a little more holistic, I'm just curious to what that answer would have been, in your opinion.
It probably would have been the second recommendation about developing mixed use. That Site B was just a little bit more challenging, and I think noise is a good way to that you phrase that, because especially in the first two public meetings, we heard a lot from the community about, why is the golf course closed? How was the decision made? And I went into this process not kind of thinking that was a done deal, and for it to sort of rear its head in this process was a little bit challenging early on. And so that's why I think there were two, because I could see, I do see the value that it brings, and if it was managed by a private organization, a private entity, it could still bring a lot of value, but there are things that I think could be done to it to improve that. So improve stormwater, improve natural ecologies, add public trails, allow people to use the site more than just a golf course. Really kind of create an open space that people can use it, and then it would bring some financial benefits back to the county if it was operated as a golf course. So that was sort of the thinking behind two options there. But that's definitely the more challenging of both sites. And you were on many of the calls, and so that was why I think we moved two recommendations forward, just to provide options.
Great, thank you. And if I might just follow up in your thanks, Madam Chair, in that same recommendation around, if it were to sell as a golf course, you put some requirements about public access and incorporating that. I would just advocate that we put one more piece in there, and that is, if we sell it as a golf course, that it needs to reflect the market value of the land, and that we're not selling it at some crazy discount just so that it can keep running as a golf course. Because I think, and that we redirect that money into to support our goals on economic development and inclusion with the county. So that's just a side note. It's not my preference, of course, to sell it as a golf course. I think that's not a secret to anyone, but But if that is one of the options, I just think that we need to make sure that we're truly looking at the market value of the land.
I think that's a really great point. And even though necessarily it wasn't something that we put out there publicly, we did talk about the value of what would happen on these sites if they were redeveloped, and where that money could go. I mean, the money could go back to affordable housing. It could go to job creation. It could go to any number of things that, as part of these conversations, I think we alluded to it, but we really didn't get into much detail. So thank you for that comment.
Thank you, Commissioner Mattis Castillo. Commissioner Carter.
Thank you very much. Again, just thanks so much to Perkins and Will for all the work that you have done, to our staff. This hasn't been an easy process, of course, but it has been one that has reflected Ramsey County's goals of engaging our community and ensuring equity as we move forward. And thank you so much to Commissioners Mattis Castillo and Reinhardt, who have been there all of the time and who have seen this process of the values developing through sometimes even very emotional, somewhat vitriolic sort of processes we've engaged with community, but knowing that we had to hear all of this and that there are great reasons that in hearing so, the values came through in such a way as you were able to then share in developing the site development scenarios, as well as the evaluation criteria that we were aided to put forward by the University of Minnesota. So this has been a real good time of being able to engage with community. And my question flow is going to be that as we work through now, knowing the city of Maplewood will hear this presentation along with your recommendations, which include on the continuation of a golf course, include the impact of that community voice that we heard particularly early on, pretty much in solo, proceeding forward. But then as the and I use that word because we have been looking at values and thinking that they are opposing other values. But as we came through this process, we're seeing how, in fact, a number of these values can work together. We have been looking at how the site development scenarios and the evaluation process today to where we can really make those compatible with each other. That first recommendation for continuing a golf course, of course, does not meet as many of the criteria. In fact, few, as well as the others do, but they're there because of that voice. So as we go through the environmental assessment, as we on for continuing community engagement. This doesn't end, with our having heard thus far. We need to walk this path forward, ensuring that we're continuing to connect to the community, ensuring that we're continuing to broaden the understanding
Is a really great question, Commissioner Carter. I think a couple of things that I think you should do. The stakeholder conversations have proved to be sort of invaluable. And as I mentioned, it's not only for this project, but it's for everything that the county is doing related to redevelopment. When Martha and I are in these conversations, we start at these sites, but the conversations always broaden out to other things that the county could be doing, other redevelopment sites that the county is thinking about, and just much broader potential. And things about specific comments around how can some of these different groups, how can they be part of redevelopment? That's a really interesting question. You know, it kind of goes to wealth building, it kind of goes to home ownership. I don't think I had heard that in many recent conversations that I've had over the last couple of years about redevelopment is how can some of these diverse groups be part of doing the redevelopment? How can they be partners in developing? You know, how can they get ownership as part of these projects? I think that's just a really amazing conversation to keep moving forward. And so I do think that those groups have reached out to us. As I mentioned, we had multiple conversations with some of those groups just to continue having conversations not only about the site but much broader. So I think continuing those conversations is really great, and I assume that they're really fantastic for Martha, who's sort of focused in on these types of projects. I think being transparent, about this process as it moves forward will be really important. Just picking up. And I tried not to watch the chat, but for those who were in the public meetings, the chat was going crazy, and it was beeping on my phone too, which was sort of obnoxious. But there's always a lot of skepticism and a lot of distrust about government, and there was a lot of, I think, I will say falsehoods. They were not accurate representations from my understanding about that. This process is already done. They've already decided it's going to be affordable housing. They're already talking to developers, right? None of those conversations have happened. And so just being transparent about this is the next step in the process. This is what we're going to do next. This is what we're going to do next. And just putting that out there, I think would be good. And then continue to work with your partner at the city of Maplewood. The partnership has been great. There are definitely some differing opinions on what should happen on these sites. Ultimately, they have regulatory land use control over what happens on these sites. And so when development proposals come forward in the future, there's likely another battle. There will be more hard conversations that will have to happen, especially if you do move forward with putting some mix of land uses and more housing and more density on some of these sites. And so continuing that relationship with them, I think, will be really important. And I think those would be three really great steps. And I applaud you for even asking the question, because I think in a lot of these projects, engagement is done. The consultant's given us our recommendation. We can check the box now. Now we can just move forward and do what we want to do. But you want to continue to have the conversation, which is really fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Carter. Commissioner McDonough.
Thank you, Chair. First, a couple quick comments along the lines of Commissioner McGuire's questioning and even Commissioner Carter's questioning there. So many times, especially when it comes to community engagement, to try to get the community deeper into the community and get that voice, we make assumptions that they understand how to participate in community engagement. And they really don't. They don't have that history. They don't have the tools, and their voices aren't heard because the organized, loud voices will drown them out all the time, as you definitely pointed out in this. And so a couple things for us to consider, maybe a little bit late here, but still maybe a tool we can use moving forward. But, we got similar issues at BTT, and early on in that process, I worked with the community and the St. Paul Foundation, and they actually came forward with a $25,000 grant to actually do some early community building, to work in very specific communities to help those communities feel like that their voices could be heard, help them understand how important it is to be engaged, and provide that path. And it was difficult at first because those loud, organized voices seeing that as they wanted to take that over, right? They wanted their voices and to really get them to understand that this isn't the community engagement process, but this is really to help support communities that traditionally have not been engaged. They haven't been asked to be engaged. They don't understand how to be engaged, to help support them to be prepared when the time came. So we might want to think about community engagement is for us, especially if we want to get deeper into the community, there needs to be a community building type component to that. Because John, as I listened to you talk about the process, even when we got to the stakeholder groups, we gravitated towards the knowns, right? That everybody goes to, the Hmong 18 Council. They're in a different position today than they were 25 years ago within the Hmong community. And their voice is one part of the Hmong community now, which has a much larger voice and many diverse voices. And, I'm going to go to where Commissioner Mattis Castile is going, because I'm extremely disappointed that option 1 is there. Because, John, even listening to your justification, it was really justified by listening to those loud, organized voices at the beginning. And for that to pop up here is really disappointing. And I believe this check-in with us is for us to be able to influence how this moves forward. And I would suggest that we take option 1 out. I don't see how it aligns with our values. It's not connected to anything that we've been advancing. And it does us a disservice within the community to have that option in there in so many ways. It harms our credibility as we try to move forward on really tough conversations in the communities, focused in on equity, community engagement, and having voices heard. And we're doing all this over here, but we don't walk the talk when it comes time for us to be able to actually demonstrate our ability to walk the talk. And so my suggestion is to the board, this is when we as policymakers weigh in. And this is time when we take all the information that's done, and I think the consultants have done an amazing job. I think our staff has done an amazing job. And for me, it's time for us to weigh in. And for me, weighing in, option 1 should come off the table as we move forward. We need to focus in on what's aligned with our values, what came out of stakeholder groups that was above and beyond the loud, organized voices. And this wasn't, option 1 was not a part of that. And so I would suggest that we take that out and move this forward based on the recommendations with that not in it. So I would actually make a motion that we would remove option 1 for site B.
I'm just looking for a point of order in terms of,
Yeah, we're in a workshop.
yeah, we're in a workshop. I don't think we can be making motions, but I think we can discuss and share those concerns, is my understanding.
Madam Chair, what we're seeking is direction. So the discussion will help to inform the full report. So this is good discussion.
Great. Well, we will continue with that discussion then. Commissioner McDonough, do you have more to add here? Otherwise, I'll move to Commissioner Reinhardt. Okay, Commissioner Reinhardt.
Madam Chair, thank you. With all due respect, I agree with Commissioner McDonough when it comes to what we should have done, and not just on this property, but in any of our community engagement, including BTT. But we didn't do that. And in fact, we had to fight in order to have community engagement at all, because the decision was made without community engagement to begin with. So as far as closing the golf course and what we were going to put up for sale. But you know what, that's 2020 vision hindsight. But I do hope that in future discussions that we have, anything where we need community engagement, that we follow what Commissioner McDonough has said. But I think it's important to note that that did not happen here. And so we went through this process. I think it was a good process. And yes, there are loud voices. But when it's in your area, in your city, in your community, do you think it would be any different in Boy's Totem Town area? Do you think, yes, there's community building going on, but that's because we engaged them? I think we could have done that here. We didn't. So I think we've learned a lot, and I like to look for positives in anything that we go through, especially things that have been as challenging as this. We learned a lot about community engagement, and we learned a lot about the importance of partnerships and listening. And even if we don't agree, that we can be respectful in that process. So that, I think, is a real positive on how we move forward with all of our decisions, not just this one. This is small compared to all the big decisions that we have to make and the community engagement that we want. As far as removing something from the process before it even gets to the city of Maplewood, I would call that truly disingenuous. You know what? We come forward, and depending on what Maplewood wants, what proposals we get, we can reject if that's what we want to do. But this was, the city of Maplewood is the lead on this. We paid for it, absolutely. But we agreed that we needed, in fact, it's in the next steps, the second next step, final Perkins and Will presentation to the Maplewood City Council in June for clarity on regarding what the city will support or allow. So to take an option off the table at this point without even letting them discuss it is disingenuous. I would also say that it is, I don't know what's going to end up coming in. But I think having options and looking at them and not having a preconceived idea, which would fall right in line with what the opponents were saying, that it's a done deal. So why would you even consider this? I think that that is beyond my comprehension, to be honest with you, as far as really asking about community engagement. I think also, as far as the market rate, I think it's important to note, and I agree with that, by the way, that it should be what its value is as a golf course. And of course, some of the other amenities, I agree with those as well. And we need to have more public access. We need to have the trails. We need to, I think, look at, I mean, there's a golf course, but there's also other property there, community gardens or an urban garden opportunity that's there. Additional recreational opportunities that are culturally specific. I think there's a lot of different options there. But I think it's important to note also that when we talk about market value, if you put in retail, if you put in high-end housing, if you put in single-family homes, the value of the land changes. And so it's relative to what the purpose is and what we are asking for. And that goes for both sites. Because yes, we're not going to give a discount to anyone. I would hope anyhow, that it is what is the value of what is being proposed. But I want to see all the proposals and see what it says. And we may decide that there's different scenarios when we put this, and we will. I mean, Perkins and Will, John, you said it very well. The scenarios are not exactly what is in here. It's that the parameters of those. So what comes in may look very different. There could be options for, the clubhouse and the driving range. There could be options for more of a nature area and much more community access that would invite community in for the golf course itself or for all of the other things that might come there. Some room for negotiation. And so I would hope that this board, and my direction is just, let's see what comes in. Let's see what the city of Maplewood has to say. That's the respectful thing to do. And I would really urge my colleagues to not cut out something just because it's not what you want. We agreed that we would go, I believe anyhow, that I agreed that whatever this report recommended, that I would support it. The recommendation is that we look for both on site B and what we look for on site A, and I will support those. Because that's all we're doing. We're talking about proposals. So please respect this process And I know I'm going to hear a lot of comments about it, but to me, this is about respect. And it's about communication and what we said we were going to do and what we hadn't done. And so I hope that this board follows that path. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Reinhardt. There's shifting in my list, but it looks like Commissioner McGuire is next.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple more comments. I appreciate all of this conversation, and just want to say that I agree with, Commissioner Mattis Castillo and McDonough, and I actually didn't say it. I was surprised to see in the recommendation for that the golf course was still there, because in all of the assessment and all of the values that we said, it just didn't seem as though that was even that would rise to that level. And so I'm just gonna repeat what Commissioner McDonough said. It seems as though we were listening to this very well organized group of people, which, as I've said before, I appreciate civic engagement. I appreciate people who are mobilized. I appreciate that, but we have to be careful not to just listen to them. We need to make sure we've engaged everyone else. And I was still surprised to see that, because it doesn't seem as though if we, did you do maybe you said in the beginning you weren't going to do a financial analysis. It doesn't seem as though you could sell this as a golf course and it would still be the financial, that it would help our finances, or it wouldn't get us closer to having more housing, or it wouldn't get us closer to, recouping any more tax base on there. So I'm just curious how it rose to a level of being a recommendation, and you could just comment a little more on that. And I'm always thinking, and I don't know, do we look at highest and best use anymore, or no? That's what this evaluation was looking at, highest and best use of that land. It just surprises me that that recommendation rose to that level after seeing everything that we saw. And I just also have to say that I appreciate that the public wants open space. Every lot that opens in my district, everywhere, they want it to be park space. I mean, people love park space. They want it to be open space. They want the county to develop more park space. So I get that, and that's great. But we can't just have a county of all park space. So we have to really balance that off with what else we need. So I'm just adding that to the mix here too, that I know that when we do public engagement, and I think we should do, I love what you said, community development, to engage these communities. We need to do all this work. And then I always think we need to have a little, just a little admission that we know that people are going to love park space. So anyway, I just had to say that as well. So if you have any other comments on that.
Madam Chair, Commissioners, John, I'll just run interference on this too. I just want to stress that John has been hired by both the city and the county as a consultant to do this kind of full range overview of what both sites could yield, both in terms of looking at the topography, the existing conditions, the ecological assessments, hearing from both the local and regional community. However, so the recommendations are of that. They are recommendations based off the information provided to Perkins and Will and to John. However, the future of the site rests in the hands of the board, and the city of Maplewood certainly has a certain level of control as well. And so I just wanted to stress that you are not restricted to the recommendations. There's a whole plethora of opportunity that could be out there, and innovative ideas that could result should this go out to the market that we may not even have considered at this time. So I just want to kind of stress that.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. And I just want to go on record also that I love park space as well. So I don't want to hear from people that says I don't want park space. I love park space. We just can't run a county on park space. So anyway, so believe me, I love him.
Thank you, Commissioner McGuire. I don't know if you have anything to add, John, to that or not. I think Carrie might have covered it.
Yeah, Carrie did a good job of running interference there for me. I appreciate that. The recommendations for Site B were definitely much more challenging, and trying to be objective and trying to use the checklist that our partners at the U of M developed was really sort of how we came to that decision. And I think you all make really valid points about, just the economic impact of that site. I was looking at it obviously through the lens of the engagement. Even some of the stakeholder groups that we talked about, the value that a golf course brings. Also looking at it from the perspective of sort of the conditions. That site, I think only half of it was developable just because of all the other restrictions that are available, which starts to not only limit what you can do from a development side, but then obviously, if with all those restrictions in place, what would you build now? Well, you probably wouldn't build a golf course, but maybe not too long ago you would have, just because you can't build on half of the land, right? So there was just a lot of different things that went into it, and I think Commissioner Reinhardt made a really good point. Was the thinking that once you do decide to move forward and start to engage development partners, or if you're going to do this through RFP or what that process looks like, just testing the market and see what the market could bear is a really good litmus test for what ultimately could happen on that site. That's one of the givens that I talk about all the time, is that there are market realities and the market changes all the time. And what we're talking about could be developed there today, might not be viable, at the end of this year. And so just really understanding when you get to that point, what the market looks like and what it could support. And at that point, maybe it is a golf course. Maybe the housing market is down and nobody is building anything. And so that I think that did play into it as well, is just really seeing what the options might be for that site. If I was really catering to both clients and catering to all the voices, I probably would have thrown up an option for site A as well, a no build option. But I don't think that's the highest and best use of the land. Now, a golf course on site B necessarily isn't the highest and best use for land, but you have invested money in developing a golf course. It provides a lot of value now. I think it could be designed and thought of a little bit differently to provide more value to the public with maybe a little more investment. And I think you could gain a lot of value out of that do go and talk to some of your core values. Now, it being redeveloped, I think adds obviously a lot more value, and you could still get all the open space. Half of the site would still be open space. So it's when you get to a point, it's just really weighing the benefits based on the market and who your partners are.
Thank you, John. Ryan, did you have something to add?
Madam Chair, I'll make it real short. I appreciate it. I just want to keep listening then. The part about open space, though, Commissioner McGuire raises an important one. I think sometimes we end up having to use what's available to us to have conversations about our community values. There are opportunities for cities across, I don't want to make this just Maplewood, like all of our cities, if we engage in different conversations around available land use, even in developed or undeveloped areas, it would change the parameters of the discussions we are currently constrained as a county to have. And as you think about housing supply and need for change, I mean, there's a bigger conversation and opportunity that goes beyond today, but something to continue thinking about is like, there's a lot of opportunity for higher and better use across a lot of land, but we often limit it to parcel discussions because there's been no interest in a bigger discussion to date. And I know there's some interest on the board in pushing that as well.
Thank you, Ryan. I'm going to say something briefly, noting that workshop was scheduled to end at noon. We will probably go 5 to 10 minutes later because I want to give everyone an opportunity to talk as well. And I see 3 commissioners still have their hands raised, but I also haven't had a chance to say anything yet. So, and Ryan gave me an in here. I'm wondering if we will get to see that full report from the Institute on Environment. John, is that something we would have access to?
Yes. Ultimately, it's intended to take up part of the document, but a lot of it will be in the appendix, a lot of their really detailed analysis. And there's a lot in that detail that we didn't even talk about. So even in each concept, we identified what we thought was the right range of affordability for the different types of units. We identified number of units for each concept, and that was a level of detail that we didn't need to present back out to the community because I think it just would muddy sort of the conversation. And so yes, all that information will be available.
Thank you, thank you. And yes, I think for me that is the most fascinating piece of it. And when as sort of a pilot to how do we have a holistic conversation about what are our values as a community, what are we looking for, so that we have a universal framework to apply across the county when these projects arise. You know, what is the right amount of park space to have? I feel like I've likened it before to, you know, people need water and air to live, but there are times when you've got too much water when you're drowning, and sometimes what you need is air, even though water is good. And right now we are drowning when it comes to housing. We don't have enough. So how do we have that conversation more holistically? And, you know, does something like 21st Century Parks really give us an in, especially layered with our economic inclusion plan, to have this conversation and to provide a framework for these future discussions? I think is really important. And then to the other conversation that we've been having about just the recommendation of continuing a golf course. You know, I completely agree with Commissioner Maddox Castillo that any sale of land to a private party to continue to run a golf course has to be at market rate. Otherwise, we as a county are subsidizing golf, and turning over county assets to a private company that could then later make that profit on it. And I don't think that is a fiscally responsible decision. And that's one of our key responsibilities here on the board. And then Commissioner Reinhardt's point, and John followed up about the market, that I think that's an important point, and that putting this out and testing the market, we have a framework to make decisions. So seeing what comes in and what, you know, there is more than just the dollar amount that's on the line, because we can also weigh it against how that proposal achieves other objectives that our community through this engagement process has identified as valuable. So my thought is looking at those options on site B1 doesn't meet a lot of those objectives that the community identified as valuable. So the dollar amount I need to see compared to other dollar amounts for other plans that meet more objectives would, I think, need to be higher to make that reasonable to me. This gives us a way to not just look at dollar amount, but to look at what that means. And to me, that means we don't take anything off the table yet. We put it all out there and say, look, this is what we're looking for. This is what the community says it needs. How do you bring that to us? Because we know that as we continue to utilize our resources, we need to keep pouring it back into these values and moving forward. But that doesn't mean that there is any sort of one prescribed single notion. And so I'm open to opening it up and seeing what comes in is where I'm at. But that anything that comes in is not just about the dollar amount, it's about the objectives fulfilled compared to that dollar amount. So we have 3 other commissioners with hands raised. So I'm going to start with Chair Carter and then move to Commissioner. Oh, just kidding. I'm going to ask Commissioner McDonough and then Commissioner Mattis Castillo to speak. And then if Director Collins wants to wrap up, we will end this hopefully by 12:10. Oh, sorry, Commissioner Carter, you do have something to say.
You know what? I was just going to say you did such a fantastic job with that summary of where we are. I guess that I would have just added, I look forward to, because we have a lot to learn yet in terms of the processes that we're in. I look forward to hearing back from staff optimal times for us to, you know, at a decision point period in time, move forward with our request out into the development community that will help us to see what in fact the possibilities are. But you said all of the things and even so much better than I could have. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioner Carter. Commissioner McDonough.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Real quick. I'll just point out and remind my colleagues here, cynicism goes both ways, right? And part of the reason why community engagement has not worked in the past in so many communities is because the cynicism of organized loud voices that look like you will always win the day, and I am not going to waste my time engaging when I know I won't have it, nobody will listen and I have no impact. And that's real and that's out there. So how we move forward in process and building that trust is really important. We can't say it matters, but then continue to behave in the same way that we have always behaved. And certainly there are safe ways to thread needles to move this project forward, right? There are safe ways that protect us politically, but there are bold ways that actually send a strong statement to the community about where we're at as a board. And what we say means something. And we can continue to nibble around the edges, and we can continue to, say, we're doing good work here in Ramsey County. I'm really proud of this stuff when we get into equity and we're leading the way. But then when we get tested, we're not quite ready for that yet. We'll nibble, but we're not ready to be as bold as we expect other people to be bold when it comes to this conversation about equity and truly listening to community. So I get it. This isn't personal for me one bit. Actually it is. The one piece that's personal for me is to be truly authentic and challenging myself, that when I say something publicly about, I really truly want to understand and make a difference about how this community engages with community, that we have done harm to. It's not just that we've ignored them, we've actually done harm to them with the decisions that we've made and other folks have made in this community. And we can minimize it. We can say, you know what, let's keep option B in, and yeah, market rate, we're demanding market rate. Those are all safe things to kind of hide behind as we move this through the process. I don't need that safe thing to hide behind as we move this thing through the process. For me, I need to be able to stand out in the community tall, knowing I've done my best to be able to allow a path for that cynicism of the past to go away from this community, from these communities, that they truly feel like their time and effort in engaging will matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner McDonough, Commissioner Mattis Castillo, and I'm hoping we'll still have time in the remaining couple of minutes for Commissioner Reinhardt.
Yeah, great. I just wanted to add one part, because I think it's really important when John mentioned it several times that our community engagement side, that community wants to be involved in the development of this land. And to that point of Commissioner McDonough is truly hearing that, is that it may look that in our call for proposals or ideas that especially our communities of color that want to get into development, that might not have the resources to buy the land and then develop. And so I just want us to keep our minds open to that. When we voted to close the golf course, we didn't vote to sell the land. We voted to close the golf course with a proposal of ideas. And it might be that we create a public land trust to allow those communities of color to come in and develop. And I just want to remind us of that, is that in hearing from community, as Commissioner McDonough said, that we're authentic in that partnership. So it might, as Commissioner Fretham said, it might not be that we get a big dollar amount and somehow we have more money, but that we get a bigger return on investment based on our values. And that I want us to keep grounded in that aspect, as what is the return on investment or the return on value investment as we move forward.
Thank you, Commissioner Mattis Castillo. Very well said. Commissioner Reinhardt, if you have a brief statement, I'll let you sum up, and then I'm going to turn it over to Carrie to send us off.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for allowing me this point. I believe with all of my heart that every single member of this board has made 100% commitment to equity. I don't know that I have ever heard any member of this board make a decision based on political, being safe. We do what we think is right. And that has been, I have been a stalwart on the equity issues. And just because we have differences of opinions on where things maybe should go, doesn't mean that any one of us is less strident about this, about equity and everything that we have been doing and giving it our all. Now, I probably can't stand as tall as Commissioner McDonough. In fact, I think I'm probably the shortest, but I do stand by what I believe is community engagement and what we have learned from this. It's not just about this property. It is about all of what we do as a community, as a county, and really working hard on the affordable housing issues and all the other things. So I just needed to make that statement because we're all committed to this, to what we're trying to do as far as change and equity and bringing back to the community. So thank you. And thank you to all the members of the board.
Thank you, Commissioner Reinhardt. Director Collins, if you want to have any closing thoughts before we adjourn.
Yeah, I'll just take a moment. I think it's important that for projects that may be contentious such as this, that we thank those that have remained diligent throughout the process. John Slack, of course, was the kind of face of what was very tumultuous and contentious engagement. And so we thank you for staying focused and driving forward. I put in the chat, want to thank Mi Chang, who helped us set up many of those stakeholder group meetings with the community, and Elizabeth Tolsman, who helped facilitate conversations as well. Martha, who was diligent in making sure that we stayed focused and looking at all of the range of opportunities to engage the broader community. But I also want to ensure that we thank the City of Maplewood Community Development staff. We've had some very tough conversations along this path, and I will say, regardless of what is a dominant voice around a particular land use, you do have some equity champions within those walls, and they are tremendous staff and tremendous partners, and we thank them for going along this ride with us, shoulder to shoulder. They too want to do what's best for the community, and that's both locally and regionally. So I just wanted to stress that as well. So thank you also to the commissioners who attended all of those engagement sessions. There were times where the best adjective is cringy. And I'm so glad that we have the economic competitiveness plan, as fertile grounds for our county to lean forward, because it's when you start to alter and change the built environment that you see those prejudices and those biases kind of render its ugly head. And it's painful to see at a practitioner level, but it also instills the criticality of driving through our equity goals. So thank you for your leadership, and we'll take this feedback and continue to work and continue to engage and come forward at a later date, but not too late, because we're eager to keep this moving to define what that process and what that call for proposals may look like. So thank you.
Thank you, Director Collins, John Slack, all the staff who have put countless hours in this effort, Commissioners Castillo, Reinhardt, and Carter for being a part of those sessions, and everyone here today. With that, we are adjourned.
Nice job.
Good job, Nicole.